this book, which some of you will be familiar with, Dancing Naked in the Minefield. Kary Mullis, of course, won the Nobel for inventing PCR, polymerase chain reaction, which is now being used for some of the tests for COVID. And he famously, before he died in 2019, he wasn't that old. He died younger than he ought to have. He famously said there's no way PCR should be used to diagnose a pathogen in a body. It's too strong. It's too powerful a process. Would you say that's an accurate description, Brett?
Yeah, let me fill it in one step further. The idea is polymerase chain reaction, because it is inherently exponential, can amplify the tiniest signal and turn it into a readable piece of data. And so the point is, let's say that you have a PCR machine and it's on a COVID ward, and you turn the cycle thresholds way up, right? What you do is you end up amplifying contamination so that many tests come back positive when in fact they shouldn't. And so his point was, you can't use that as right. There's virus everywhere, right? That this is one of the things you learn, in a laboratory settings. It's very hard to control this stuff. And so if you have an amplifier, and basically the point is it can amplify any low level of signal into one that is then going to trigger your test, it's not an appropriate diagnostic. At the very least, you would have to figure out how to calibrate it, and you would have to hold the cycle thresholds perfectly still so that you could see over time what was changing, right? You have to have a definition for what it is to be positive with COVID, rather than a floating definition that allows you to effectively shunt people into that category by amplifying contamination.
Yeah. So there's a ton in this book that is extraordinary. And I haven't read all of it, and this could have been said by a lot of scientists, but it's amazing how many scientists are not saying this now. The scientists who would tell you to follow the science are mostly not saying this right now. Again, Kary Mullis. Claims made by scientists, in contrast to claims made by movie critics or theologians, can be separated from the scientists who make them. It isn't important to know who Isaac Newton was. He discovered that force is equal to mass times acceleration. He was an antisocial, crazy bastard who wanted to burn down his parents' house. But force is still equal to mass times acceleration. It can be demonstrated by anybody with a pool table and familiar with Newton's concepts. This is just a perfect summary of the point that, again, one that we've been making over and over and over again. But, the claims made by people in white coats with no reference to the actual data and no ability for those of us who could potentially understand it to see that data amount only to their opinions. That is not science speaking. That is someone who may or may not have an appropriate credential making opining. That is them opining. That is not them sharing a scientific conclusion. It sounds like it is, and they want us to believe it is, but we can see from the rapidity with which, for instance, the CDC is changing their minds about stuff, and the fact that I don't remember where it is, but apparently the newest thing is what is Walensky and the rest of her team focusing on? They just hired a PR firm. Now, at one level, okay, they got a PR disaster on their hands for sure. But they have a PR disaster on their hands in part because they have an actual scientific disaster on their hands. And when I read that they had hired a PR firm, this was one of the main approaches that they were taking to try to fix the messaging problem, I was reminded of, and you know exactly where this is going, Brett, but this was the move at Evergreen about 2 weeks into the mess there. Instead of fixing it and turning it around and being reasonable and seeing logic and having compassion for people with real complaints in that case, or recognizing what the data are actually saying and not calling people crazy and then having things that were called conspiracy theories 6 months ago now accepted quietly without anyone ever saying anything. Instead of actually fixing the problems at the agency, they're going to hire a PR firm to figure out how to cozy it up and make it look good. This is not what a science agency in the United States in 2022 should be doing, obviously. This is not where their priorities should be.